Will probably should have turned around at this point, given upcoming events. But he kept on walking. So here's our next sentence. While the sun began drooping in the sky, Will determinedly continued his trek into a small valley that he had not previously known. This is a good sentence to look for verbs. To droop, begin drooping, began drooping, there's one verb, action verb. Will continued, here's the second one, action verb. Into a small valley. Had, there's a helping verb, and there's the main verb, known, to know. So I'll put the action verb over this, but it goes for both. Once we identify our verbs, we start to think that we're looking at several clauses, and we are. I see this opening section, while the sun began drooping in the sky. What began drooping? Sun. There's the subject. I think what we've got here is a dependent clause. It's a subordinate clause. It opens with the subordinate conjunction. These just modifying the definite article. In the sky. Preposition, object of the preposition, modifier. All of this, the entire prepositional phrase, is adverbial, modifying the verb. That's our first clause. At the end of this, I'll take a look at what it's doing, operating as one unit, what it's modifying. But if we continue on to the next clause, it's the main clause. We've got a subject. Who continued? Well, Will did. Determinedly, lovely, adverb, modifying continued. Continued what? Continued is an action verb. Will continued trek. Here's the direct object. It's his trek into a small valley. Not too tricky. We've got our preposition, we've got our object of the preposition, a couple of modifiers here for that object. The entire prepositional phrase, into a small valley, is talking about his trek. We've got this final clause that stands alone, that he had not previously known. We've got our action verb, previously is modifying it, not is just an adverbial trigger. He is the subject. Now this is where it's a bit tricky. He had not known, let's just strip this down to the guts. He had known what or whom. I've got an action verb. I'm wondering whether I have a direct object, and in fact I do. It's right here. This is a dependent clause, but what it ends up being is a relative clause opening with that relative pronoun, that. The entire relative clause now is acting adjectively. Remember, relative clauses function either as nouns or as adjectives. This is talking about that valley. That brings us back to the last, or the first clause, while the sun began drooping in the sky. That's not a relative clause, it's a subordinate clause opening with this subordinate conjunction. Subordinate clauses typically function as nouns or adverbs, sometimes as adjectives. And this one, while the sun began drooping in the sky, I don't think it's simply talking about when he continued, although you could argue that and make it adverbial. I think it's washing over more than that. Will continued, and much of the remainder of the sentence, what can have modification power over an entire sentence? An adverb. So whether I decide that this is most clearly modifying continued, or something a bit more grand, washing over the entire sentence, we're still talking about a subordinate clause.